See if it works. We are live. Well, Mark was the first and only brave soul to jump into the live stream. Last week we had an Estuary and all kinds of people wanted in, and now it's just my faithful friend Mark. So uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Oh, yeah, another faithful has jumped into the stream.
Are we live?
Yeah, we're live.
Oh, wow. We're recording? Oh boy.
We're on, Chad. We are.
Oh, you got dropped.
I don't know. People jumping into live streams, and then, are we live? It's like, probably.
Well, let me explain. There he is. There he is. All right, the masked man is back.
Yeah.
So a little bit of explanation. Friday morning, before the summer, I always did the question and answer on Discord, and I'm going to plan on doing that regularly still. But I wanted to play around with some different ways. And so when Jacob visited me here in Sacramento, he took me out to lunch and revealed to me his plan for this little corner and his plan to get beyond everything, which is basically turn this little corner into the Trinity Broadcast Network. I was a little, some of you might not know who the Trinity Broadcast Network is. And I thought, I don't know, Jacob, if, a gaudy set with, he said, no. What we need is a 24-hour-a-day network. And when Bridges of Meaning started and we were playing around with a lot of voice chat and video chat, we sort of had that because you have people sort of all around the world, and you can more or less do that. Part of what happens with a walled garden, like let's say a Discord is, when you have moderation, is that you have ins and outs, and ins and outs are always fine, but you're going to have to centralize those ins and outs through either an individual or a committee, so on and so forth. And that's absolutely appropriate. Every walled gardens are good. They need their moderators, otherwise they fail to function. What I've been watching Jacob do his just chatting live streams, and those are, you get 7, 8, 10, 15 people in there. Oh, we got David in here too, so we'll let David in. We have a bunch, you can let a bunch of people in, but he's also been preaching to me the advantages of StreamYard, which I'm now playing around with, obviously. And so I kind of wonder, I've been talking about sort of a successor Discord server, but I'm part of what's essential to Discord servers are text, and text changes the nature of the conversation. It has certain advantages and certain disadvantages. And what I'm more looking for is video on, authentication, so people are who they say they are, and live conversation. And Chad just makes me laugh. And so that's part of the reason I'm playing with this. And the whole homeroom thing came about because Grim Grizz made the comment that, Paul, your videos come out first thing in the morning, and your videos are kind of like homeroom. And then we, see what you're talking about today, and then we start the day and go to all of our different classes. And I wonder if the evolution of Jacob's idea of TBN isn't something more like a loose network of channels that do this. And we might have some kind of centralized schedule, so that there are at least certain people within the network, or people know when certain live channels are going to be on. Jacob is often doing this in the evening. It'll sometimes go quite late. I see that Gavin has sort of picked things up in the morning. And I don't know, to me, the face-to-face, at least in a virtual space, conversation has more potential and more ability. So I don't know, Mark, you've been seeing that. This doesn't have to be what we talk about by no means the whole time. The point of this is more just kind of check in. Last week I ran the Estuary thing, and so I asked people to be available for the whole 2 hours, and that was, I thought, a good experiment. Today I'm going to do something a little bit more like Jacob has been doing. People can drop in and out. We can watch Chad fold his laundry. You know, something closer to the open studio that we were playing around with in the Discord server, perhaps. But yeah, that's my idea. So I don't know any comments on that.
Yeah, I like that. I didn't realize Grim Grizz. I must have missed that on Twitter. Twitter doesn't feed you everything. But,
no, he didn't say it on Twitter. It was one of the just chatting things with Jacob. And
okay.
I was there, and Grim was there, and Sam was there, and Jacob, and a couple other people. So, and he mentioned that, and I thought, yeah, that's kind of, because a big part of this, of course, with the little dust up we had this summer is, well, okay, so what's Paul's role in this thing? And of course, Jacob wanted me to have more of a messianic role, more of a hierarchical role, which I resisted, and he cursed me for being a Protestant.
Death row.
Correct. I'm with him on all of that, actually, Paul. But okay.
So we can talk about that too today. So it's basically this time slot for me is I put out a lot of video during the week. There's a lot of ideas going, around. But I hear from you guys in the comments section on Twitter and some of these other spaces, but it's better also to hear sort of long form. And, you know, there's only so many rando slots to go around. So this is a time to talk back, and maybe that'll be a next week's thing. So.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to get that enchantment, right? So you were talking about text channels and their limitations. I mean, they do have advantages, right? Like when you have to type something out, there's advantages to thinking things through before you send them into the ether. So I have a good friend. He's actually was on the Discord, not so much. He's more on Clubhouse now, and he rambles very, very well. He's wonderful to listen to when he rambles, but on Twitter he's deadly. Like his Twitter posts are fantastic because they're limited.
Yeah, and
that's sort of the advantage, right? So you can say, "Oh, Twitter's terrible," but like for him, man, when I see his Twitter posts, I'm always so delighted because I'm like, this isn't going to take 20 minutes because it's Twitter. And he always does like one post. He doesn't do threads, and they're excellent. But when he's talking, he tends to go off and wander and all that. So in a way, this voice and video in particular are re-enchantments, right? And Clubhouse got popular because it's a re-enchantment, right? It's an upgrade from mere text because now you have the real-time aspect, right? And you also get the tone data out of it, right? But then with video, you also get the crazy, whatever people do with their hands. I don't know. I mean, some people I'm told talk with their hands. I don't know anything about it. But, and you get to see Chad fold his laundry and show. See, Paul, you were trying to take credit for being the Messiah, but Chad actually demonstrated to you that, no, the top lobster is still Peterson. You're just a sub-lobster dude. Sorry. I hate to, you're a sub-lobster. But you are the homeroom guy. He's not the principal, right? Principal doesn't run homeroom. So it's okay. You can take a little bit of leadership. It'll be fine.
David, you've been around. What do you think?
I was just I usually take Friday off, and I'm feeling a little sick today, and so I was just lounging around, and I was on YouTube, and then I saw this homeroom thing. I was like, what's that? And then I looked, and it was like starting in 6 minutes. I was like, huh? And then I saw, if you'd like to join, click this link. And so I had some things. I make pizza every Friday afternoon, and usually have to make dough right around lunchtime. And so I frantically made the dough in 5 minutes, and just put on the computer. I'm like, whatever this is, I'll give it some time. And here I am. I didn't know how this would work. So I don't have 2 hours to give. I might have like an hour to give, but
well, that's part of. So last week I did make the I did make the request that if people joined, that they be able to stay for the whole time, and those who did. Part of what I was thinking about in terms of a successor Discord network, and I'm now thinking more that StreamYard might be a better way to go, would be not only an idea of different channels that you can sort of bank on having a live stream at a certain place, because that reliability builds the potential for community. If you can schedule it, if you're expecting it, you can bank on it, you can fit it into your schedule. There's probably a group of people who similarly have those hours available, but I also like that it's potentially disconnected. So, for example, I was hearing from some people how, Jacob had banned them from his streams. And I think that's absolutely the right of the people who are hosting the stream. And I think I think the selective selection that goes on is actually a healthy thing. So maybe you can't get into Jacob's stream, gives it a little bit of cachet and exclusivity. But I tend to be very open, and so not I don't really. Someone just our new atheist, not our new atheist, our new Islamic commenter named Claire on the in the comment section accused me of banning people from the stream or from the comment section. The truth is, I've only done it twice, and one person sort of attacked Freddie, and I wouldn't stand for that. And
she's not real. That's what Jacob says.
That and when I saw that, when I see how she acts, I had that thought too. Now, I think Jacob's a little quick on the trigger for the for some of the conspiracies. But again, the diversity around those sensitivities, I think, again, is a feature, not a bug. Because the truth is, someone like me, who tends to be very willing to trust, will probably not see some things that Jacob will, and Jacob will see some things that I'll miss. And so actually the diversity in the ecosystem of having different people working different channels and having a network instead of necessarily a hierarchy, I think is valuable. There will always be hierarchy dynamics by virtue of channel size, personality, relationships, status in other committees, other tribes, so on and so forth. So yeah.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Aaron, I watched your conversation with Gavin yesterday, and I really was tempted to join in, but I was building a computer, so
I clipped it though. It's on my channel.
Did you?
Yep, that and you today.
Well, may I ask, what was it that resonated for you or was interesting to you?
For me or Chad?
Both.
Go ahead.
Let's see. How can we do this? Will this forefront who's ever talking? I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
So, well, I thought you saw the two little clips I took out of Chevy's conversation. Randall's conversation I had with him today. I know a lot of people, especially sometimes if you're within a tribe, you want to see content on your screen that has your tribe winning. But as a pastor, I think, in terms of process, it's really important to have people sort of express their thoughts. And Gavin was, laying out his ideas. And I think he was doing it clearly. I think he was doing it transparently, honestly. And I think, Aaron, you were being an excellent conversation partner. I mean, you and I haven't interacted much, but just my assumption was that you're a committed Christian, but you were having a very good faith dialogue with him about that which is most important. And I think seeing that happen is very important for people to do less parasitic processing, as John Vervaeke likes to say.
Yeah.
And yeah, for me, it was I don't know what I usually do is I hear something and I'm intrigued by these ideas. So what caught my attention was the same thing, similar to something that Paul put out today with that Roger stuff, was the topic around change. And I was thinking about that, how, I think most of my life I've believed that change could be implemented by a person or even by like several people. But when you guys started talking about it yesterday, I was thinking it seems like change is more of like something that trickles and takes place and we interact with it. It doesn't, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it doesn't seem like this is something that's implemented. I mean, I'm sure like some of changes, but like major changes are almost like, like we're grabbed by these waves and pushed around. And that's what I was thinking about. And it's interesting to me. I don't know. Again, one of the big things that's been on my mind for weeks now has been the idea of control that we talk about. It's as if we talk about things in a manner of process or control. Like we can manage things, and it's like we're totally putting on the back burner or not thinking about how things are just happening sometimes that are completely beyond our control, and it's like we want to neatly evade that topic. So that's what I was thinking about, and it was a great conversation. If you want to check out my clip, it's on navigating patterns. I mean, refresh. It's called Change.
Yeah. Well, I have a question about that because that sounds like the Egregor thing, but the first time I heard the word Egregor, I honestly thought of the Holy Spirit. But the fact that the Egregor can be considered a bad thing, I didn't think about. But we feel like there's spirits that move the culture in a way that we might disagree with. Does it feel like sometimes, can you disagree with the Holy Spirit? Is that a thing? Can I?
Well, I was thinking about that, like, and I brought this up in the comment to Paul when he brought up Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love AA, and it's changed my life, and I think it's the best process to go by for which to become sober and even potentially find a relationship with God if you don't have one. However, I think there's unintended consequences that have happened by the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I think there's things like some of the what do they call that? Weaponized compassion, and a lot of language made its way into the medical field through the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous with good intentions, and then it went through all these filters and these money making mechanisms, and it spat out something that we have now, which is like this. I don't know, a misuse of care, I think. And that's spawned a bunch of things that nobody would have intended. Now, what's the trade off? Would I go back and eliminate AA altogether? I don't think so. But it's like, will we go back and eliminate the Reformation altogether? I don't think so. How about Renaissance? I don't know. So it's like, that's why I think we have to be very, very careful with what we're doing here, because there are some potential unintended consequences that you can never map out. And so we have to pay attention. And I'm probably going to get off soon, but I freaking love you guys. And I'm going to listen for a minute.
Oh, we love you too, Chad. Well, this gets into the same dynamic in terms of the difference between Jacob and I with respect to, is Islamic Claire in the comments section a real person? And we do have to take care, but this risk is always on a spectrum, and risk too little and it's a problem, risk too much, it's a problem. I mean, you're always trying to balance that. And I think part of the way we modulate this is, in fact, with a more distributed community. Because if one of us stumbles and falls, you have others who sort of continue to move the movement forward. Part of the weakness with a lot of my experience is obviously in the church realm. with a lot of churches and communities and movements that are very much based around charismatic leaders is that they rise or fall with respect to many different things with the leader. So Peterson, obviously, in wave one, 2016 to 2018, got a lot of things going. And then, when he's flat on his back in a coma, that's actually not a bad thing for the movement, because what it allows is for us to see, okay, what else in the movement can happen? Is there differentiation in the movement? Then in wave two, he comes in with a few different themes. Then I say wave three begins with Daily Wire. And now we're watching that sort of move forward. So my preference tends to be more experimental, less institutional, and more distributed, and less centralized. So
I was interested in the video with Andrew Tate and the other guy, Muhammad, because that idea of wanting a hardliner and a soft touch, I forgot what that was.
Well, there's a steep slope and a gentle slope.
Yeah.
And Mark, of course, left a very meaty comment in there. And I said, you and I are going to have to talk about that. So maybe we can talk about that this morning too, because that's one thing that I've noted in churches. Some churches are steep slopes. And I've seen that for a long time in ministries with, in ministries with, let's say, that deal with prisoners, because it's not at all unusual in the Black community and the Hispanic communities in the inner city places that you've got some minister, often of a Pentecostal church, who's been in jail. He became a Christian, got his life cleaned up. He regularly pulls kids out of prison, cleans them up, but it is hard line, it is do or die, it is right now, and here are these rules. They're very hard rules. They're very strict rules. Step out of line. There are consequences right away. That kind of ministry can be enormously effective for certain people, but there are also downsides to that kind of ministry. And then that's kind of steep slope ministry. And Peterson very much evoked a steep slope ethos, whereas a lot of other ministries are gentle slope. Where it's, but I think the difference in that is often has to do with sort of the realm of functionality. Someone who can hold down a day job, maintain a family. They've already got a number of stabilizing life things around them. That tends to be much more gentle slope, because you leave their agency alone. People who are in crisis, often you jump in and you basically hijack their agency and you say, this is all the stuff that you're doing that's destroying your life. That's got to end now. These are the things you need to start doing. And if you don't start doing these things and stop doing those things, you're just going to wind up in the hole again. So, and a guy like Andrew Tate, it seemed to me, has been, even before Islam, a lot of people said, well, he found a religion that validated his, his ideas anyway. But he's going to come out there with a steep slope methodology. And that sort of mirrors then onto what I often talk about in Reformed theology. It's the difference between the antithesis, which is black-white, and common grace, which is sort of analog gray space. So
I'm curious how long you maintain those hard lines, because I found myself in a hardline position once I found a certain type of recovery, like a by the book recovery. And I was like, real rigid, hardline. It's got to be done this way because this is the right way. And that became very hard to maintain, because it kind of it started to destroy my ability to maintain and actually make relationships with people, because I was kind of is a lonely space to be in. So I'm wondering, that's why I think red pill thing is so goofy to me, because I get it, I've been there, but once you come in swinging, or even like new converts come in real hard swinging, and they're like, man, they're on fire and they're real zealous, and it's like, wow, I just basically alienated myself from everybody else. And like, how long do hard lines actually last within an individual? That's what I'm curious about.
Right. Well, let me tie this together, because it goes right to the point of my meaty comment on that particular video, right? And I do think, Paul, we should have a long conversation about this, but I'll outline something instead real quick. It just ties together a bunch of stuff that's been said, plus the comments here that are in StreamYard. I think when you talk about egregor and you talk about distributed cognition, you're actually talking about the same thing to some extent. Right? You're talking about this concept that beyond the quote individual, there is something greater, right? When there's two people trying to cooperate to build something bigger than either of them can build by themselves, something emerges, right? And you can go the, all kinds of religious routes with that, but I'll avoid all those routes because Paul's here and he can do those if he wants, right? But there's a way in which an egregor is just a name for spirit. I have a video on that on navigating patterns, of course. Egregors memes and spirits, right? Because it's the same thing, right? But there's also this idea that, can you sit there and have an institution distributed? No. Institutions are the method by which proper distribution happens, right? In other words, you need some amount of structure, and you could have too much or too little, but you need some amount of structure in order to manifest something that's bigger than just you, or just you plus somebody, or just you plus 10 other people. You need, I don't know what that structure is, right? I could point to, and I kind of went over this today on language of creation. It's right in there, right? The head, right, points downwards with authority, and the body points upwards with, with power, basically. So there's this relationship of the things, the energy at the bottom of the pyramid of the structure being led up into the head, and then the head coming back down and organizing it and saying, okay, we're going to go in this direction with all this crazy energy, right? And that's right in language of creation. So that's the key. And egregor is just an expression of what we'll say a lame expression, because egregor is originally a summonable demon, right? That's where it comes from. It comes from the occult. It's from summonable demon or spirit or whatever, right? But it's just another word for spirit. It's easier to use the word spirit than it is to use the word egregor, because spirit's more encompassing. But that's the thing, is this distributed cognition is no good if it's completely distributed, right? Because then you just get into fights. And the way in which this ties into that video about sort of the hard line versus the soft line is that there is a middle ground. And I have a video on this too. What did Peterson do? One of the things Peterson does is his pragmatic approach. He doesn't tell you to do things. He says, you could do these things, and I think you'll have these types of results. Mm-hmm. He doesn't say, clean your room. He says, if you clean your room, this is probably what will happen, and this is why you should clean your room. And then he moves on to the next point. So it's not a hard line, and it's not a soft line, because the soft line people are like, oh, come be with us, because more people is better. But more people is not better if they're not cooperating in the structure, because then that energy can't be formed.
If I may step in, I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks. And hopefully you understand me, because I'm from Germany, so my accent might be noticeable. Anyway,
coming through good.
I think. Okay, great. What I think is important here, Mark, is that we often deal with practical issues as if it was something detached from experience. What we are talking about here are experiences accumulated over generations and over centuries of scientific progress, of course. The thing is that there is something, this pragmatic approach says, if you do so as well. And Peterson often ignores this dimension, because he has this kind of habit of saying the individual is the same thing as the group. And I think that he often oversees minimal differences, which might be of importance sometimes, for example, for the discomfort in society. Oftentimes you have a situation when someone says, this is the kind of pattern, that is the kind of situation in which you are involved. And if you are in this situation, you have to act appropriately. And that is the situation where it comes in, where you say, okay, if you are in the situation, you must do this. This is obligatory. But oftentimes there's something inside of us, there's this will, which comes up and says, I don't want that. I don't want that. But I have to. This is certainly the issue when someone says, you should. And I think he sometimes circumvents that problem by the similarity of his approach. Stories really work, I think, because people listen to this kind of story. They say, okay, I notice the pattern. It is immediately accessible over the roundabout way over the brain, and I perceive the world as if I was inside the story. And I think there is a little mistake in this kind of approach, which says we are building everything up on stories. It seems as if there is an issue which leads to the substitution of the individual by stories. And it denies, in a certain way, the possibility for the creation of new qualities. Because if you say, oh, okay, everything is as already agreed upon, as we all know about it, we have this kind of experience, then we always say, okay, what you're dealing with here, in a pragmatic sense, is substitution of the concrete, what we experience now, by all those kinds of stories we've had in the past. And I think that might be the danger involved here. And that is also one of the reasons why it's so plausible, why Peterson is, I would say, successful. Because the individual oftentimes substitutes himself with what he is hearing of someone else. He always wants to be a hero, someone like the hero. And he really wants to be that, of course. But this does not stop this distinction, this little gap between myself and the story that I want to realize. Okay, now I shut up. I think I've gotten the point along. Yes. Did that make sense to you anyway?
Okay, well, maybe Mark, because you cut in and out a few times, so I didn't quite capture it. Mark, could you summarize it? Do you think you caught it?
Yes, I think I did. Yeah, okay. I mean, there's a so this goes back, and I had an excellent talk with Catherine Wilson, right, who ran the conference in Thunder Bay on the intimacy crisis. She was kind enough to give me two plus hours of her time to fix that, fix that problem that I'm having expressing it. So when you are engaged in the world as though there is a hero in the story, and that you are him, and that you know what the story means because the story means exactly what you think it means, which is a very postmodern thing. Oh, I understand what this story is about. Then you close off the ability to interact with potential.
Yes.
Right? And there's a way, well, hold on, right? There's a way in which the individual has an important contribution, which is their perspective, right? That thing you were talking about before, Paul, right? Where, yeah, Jacob, sort of jumps the gun, and he's conspiratorial, not as conspiratorial as Grim Grizz, though. So, but sometimes that's the right answer.
Yes, exactly.
Because you can see things that you can't, and sometimes, right? So there is a contribution for the individual, but when we think there is a hero in a story,
yes,
I think we're making a mistake right off the bat.
Yes,
I've been paying better attention to stories, and especially good stories. There's always helpers. There's always ways in which the hero can't do their task alone. Always. And there's always ways in which there's a negotiation in that. Sometimes it's a negotiation in the way they're going to do what they're going to do. And sometimes it's if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. And so you've taken away the individualism and added in what I would call the intimacy, the quality of the connection. And when you account for quality, because this is another point that Peter touched on, when you start trying to account for quality, now you can't have a concrete, certain view of the world, right? The particular has to break down to let the potential in. And quality is always potential because it cannot be measured. So I think that's what he was trying to exemplify. Peter, was that fair?
I think that's quite correct what you're saying, especially because there is something, there are certain modes of existence. I would like to describe it by the following two pairs of words: objectifying and performative. The story is only accessible by the performative dimension. You can lean yourself back. You can get back and look at the world as if it was a kind of object, as if it was the cup from Peugeot's videos or something, or you can. I'm somehow reminded of this video with I don't know his name, the guy who has depressions, and those two modes in which he was looking at the word. There is this performative mode where he's acting in the word, where he has access to the meaning that you are describing, and then sometimes he says, I was never so aware of a word as when I was depressed. And that is something quite important, because he thinks, or he speaks, as if the word was an illusion. It was something that you can see through. He's more penetrating with the eyes in the objective mode, objectifying mode. But as soon as he accesses this performative dimension, he is able to get in the meaning, the story, all the qualities he cannot see, he cannot really perceive when he leans back, looks at the word and says, I perceive something else. There are so many things in between that I see as problems, as a risk, something that hinders me of engaging in this particular mode. And I think when we switch in between those two modes, we often get in a very discomfortable situation. We often speak and behave as if one of the two modes was the only one existing, but they both exist. And I think that is one of the reasons why we have to come up with certain ways of talking, of solving this discomfort in society. And I think that might be an issue that Peterson, Peugeot, and many others have not yet dealt with, I think. That those two modes exist, but they have to take them into the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's actually an area where Vervaeke does much better, right? Where he talks about
Yes.
looking at versus looking through and taking off the glasses,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And I would think, his block in my mind is that he doesn't recognize that reality is the thing that is the result of those two processes continually going on, right? Because we co-manifest reality. And I think that, Joey's got a nice comment. Joey always has nice comments, right? I think actually play, or serious play, as John would call it, but play as maybe Peterson would talk about it when Jordan Peterson talks about play. Play is the discovery of the oughtness, right? It's the participation in the thing, right? And it doesn't take you out of anything. It just puts you in the oughtness mode. Whereas when you're structured, when you're doing this concrete thinking or this particular sort of thinking or particular knowledge, if you're using the model that we modified from Vervaeke, when you're in particular mode, you kind of know what's going to happen, right? Or you kind of have an expectation, a high level of expectation. But you have to come out of that to get a potential. Otherwise, you don't literally, this is where eyes to see, right? You don't have eyes to see. If I'm expecting that every time I tell Paul something that he's finally going to see what I'm trying to get him to see, then I'm just going to be disappointed and frustrated because he almost never does, right? And that's fine, right? But he's getting closer. Sometimes I think there's hope for him yet. We'll see.
Yes, where I perceives everything except itself, as it is involved in the word.
Yeah.
Does this bring in like the importance of tradition and stuff like this?
Yes, I think so.
I think tradition is good, although like that shouldn't. There's difficulty with that too, because it shouldn't be hard lines there exactly either. I mean, well, they should be, but they shouldn't be expected to be upheld at all times. I don't know if I'm hitting that right, but like even like some of the, just looking at some of the traditions in church and stuff are pretty good. And I don't know. I ran out.
Sorry, Paul.
No, go ahead, Aaron. You had a question. This all started with your question about steep slopes and gentle slopes. So I want to make sure we get back to that.
Yeah, just trying to join in the conversation. It does feel like there are kind of two peoples, the hardliners and the soft touch people. And I think maybe the reason, I think probably also going to this play and adventure and seeking like this archetypal, this is a person that we should follow, is that is there maybe like a lack of a real adventure or a lack of a real purpose, and the reason why people kind of butt heads is because they're trying to conserve or push forward something that is more spiritual or ideological rather than actually manifesting really in this world. Because I listened to a debate between Stitch and Adam Friendon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, President Sunday, more
Yes.
of a progressive type. And they were talking about being a centrist, basically. And,
Political centrist?
yeah,
Okay, left and right, and those are the two extremes, right?
something like that.
Okay.
The progressive was saying that the centrist was inherently right wing because he wasn't progressing. and and I like the guy; he's an all right guy. But I guess my confusion is that I would like to hold on to the foundations, and to me, that's what really a conservative is whatever you're conserving, you're holding on to a foundation, and as a progressive, you're kind of following the Holy Spirit or something that's. Mark is shaking his head. Do something better, and I guess I would like those modes to work together, where you don't throw
Yes.
away thing that you've been given, but you can also, because I'll pass the talking wand. But my church, Gap group, it's like a singles group, so it's already kind of awkward. But goes through those kind of things where we really want to maintain tradition, but people get frustrated with each other, and then they want to go somewhere else, or people, that we're like our church is having those little issues, and I was wondering, whether they're religious or not religious, how do you reconcile things?
Well,
The tolerance for
Is there
discomfort.
someone who wants to step in, or could I answer?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, actually, I wanted to step in right when you were starting your topic, and so it's great that you came back into the discussion, because that's actually the reason why I wanted, to talk with you all. Anyway, I think there is a lot to what you were talking about, that there is maybe a problem with the idea of utopia, something that is not here, not this place. It's, I think, exactly the meaning of utopia. And there is a discussion, I think, in modern sociology between Jürgen Habermas and Niklas Luhmann. I looked for the book, but I couldn't grab it right now, so I have to do it without. Anyway, Jürgen Habermas was speaking and talking to Niklas Luhmann and saying, you have this autopoietic model of society, of a system theory, and it doesn't seem to account for the possibility of a different society. And this goes back to what I was saying, that all we are dealing with are experiences which we ascribe to the world because we have learned to say, okay, this relates to this relates to that, they are both similar, and seemingly we can apply this experience to that particular case. And if we are always going back to past experiences, that's bad. Anyway, when we go back to past experiences, always, there is something in it that seems to maintain already existing structures. And then someone, as Jürgen Habermas, who is obviously coming from the Marxist tradition, speaks and says, wait a minute, it maintains the structures we've already had. Okay, Aaron, did you hear anything of that, or should I repeat it maybe?
I actually did get out of this Discord or conversation, but
okay, maybe I repeat it. I'm sorry. Well, there is actually this kind of discussion in sociology, in German sociology, between two protagonists, and one of them is Luhmann, system theory, and the other is Jürgen Habermas. And he comes from a Marxist tradition. They want a utopia. They want to change the existing society. And what you were talking about is it possible to maintain tradition, or do we have to give up? Have we to resign this and exchange one thing for the other? Is it necessary for utopia to drop the whole idea of tradition? And he says, okay, when you use the system theory approach, you always have a situation that you use experiences of the past, and you always limit to what we can speak of to experiences of the past. So maybe there is something to what you already said, that we lose the possibility, but we have a great gain. We can only, I think this leads back to what you were talking about, Mark, we can only get to this more complex society, the more differentiated ways of approaching the world, if we use what we have learned. Anthropology knows that we have two kinds of societies, hot and cold. Levi-Strauss, I'm not going into that, but they know that some societies just want to maintain what already exists, and some risk more, and risk more change. And we can only access the very pluralistic and the more complicated kind of structures if we use this kind of mechanism we have by institutions, past traditions, and so on.
Because they both rely on each other a lot, I think.
Of course, yes, exactly.
You have to stand somewhere to build something, right? And the direction model of the world, which is all relativism, leads to direction only, right? Direction is only useful in a two-dimensional model, like technically speaking, if you want to map it onto geometry, right? So you're dealing with Euclidean geometry, right? But we live in a three-dimensional world, at least, right? And non-Euclidean geometry and Euclidean geometry have conflicts, like parallel lines never meet and parallel lines always meet, right? So that means you need a different set of rules, basically, right? You need to understand different. Now, when you're dealing with things that are just directional, you're fine. And this is the Sam Harris error. Oh, I can know the worst possible thing, and I can move away from it, and goodness imagines, right? Bang. If I move away from the bad, the evil, then I'll be good. That's not true. It's just a ridiculous fourth grader view of the world, right? Because we don't live in a world of only good and evil, and there's more evil than there is good, which is why being good is a struggle. You have to struggle to be good. And so what you need in a world like that is not direction, mere direction. It's orientation. But you can't orient in the world from 2 points. In other words, it can't be relativistic. You can't use direction. You need 3 points to orient. And there are classes you can take on orientation and using an orienteering compass, for example. And they
or you could see my video on the Grim Grizz channel, Character AOO, which is all about alignment, attitude, and orientation. And it's only like 6 minutes because I get to the point. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Graham. Good to see you.
So you need this fourth step so that the orientation is complete. Grim Grizz Radio. Without any loss.
You got to know where the fringes are, folks, or how are you going to navigate your patterns?
That's right. You need that foundation to know where the fringe is, right?
And motivation. This is where the play comes in, because you are not only guided by your knowledge, and you also have a kind of passion with it.
Yeah.
And people often are lost if they do not have this kind of passion, if they do not have any institutions, any frame in which they can fit inside of a pattern, because you can always objectify and step back and look at the world without engaging with it. And this doesn't help. You have all the knowledge, you have all the experience, but you have no motivation. And so the question is, what is able to move the will of the people?
Well, and Aaron, your question in terms of a singles group in church, let's say tradition or conservative versus a progressive, it almost always focuses on a very select set of ideas or goals or changes they want to pursue. And there is, of course, an implicit assumption that the achievement of these changes will produce something. Usually people are very unclear about exactly what that something will be. And in my experience too, most of those changes and ideas are pretty much off the shelf from other stuff going on in society. Churches by their nature, religions by their nature, slow down the process of change because traditions, church traditions, rehearse the tradition. They rehearse the what has made that group. All of that identification and orientation happens in the group, and then there's a desire, usually from the outside, that says we want to change in these ways, and that's absolutely common. It's very ordinary, and it is also, though, very predictable. There's very limited set. I mean, I would imagine you could walk into almost any singles group in a church, and most of the time you can predict exactly what issues they are wrestling over. Wow. Because church after church after church after church, they're all the same. And just depending on sort of where the churches are in a certain spectrum, they'll arrive at these things at different points. Like in the Christian Reformed Church, we're having the same-sex marriage fight now, instead of in the 70s when the Presbyterian Church in the USA had their fight, and on and on and on and on. And so, obviously things are moving through society in some ways. And yeah,
I was hanging out with another friend of mine who goes to that church, and we're like the only two guys, and there's a bunch of girls, which is pretty cool. But
for a church singles group, sounds
cool.
Optimal from a guy's point of view.
But it's kind of hostile too, where I guess he was
to you or the girls,
for each other, I guess.
Well, okay.
I don't know. Everyone kind of complains with about each other, but I guess I kind of avoid that.
Sounds great.
But we get kind of labeled this hypocrite around, and or not loving. Like there was a guest, and this girl didn't really feel welcome because like all the other girls are like being kind of like shadow matriarchy is the word, I guess.
Competitive.
Great neologism. Great.
But I mean, I guess going back is that we have like a hard time finding dating. Sometimes if I ask out a girl like in the public, she's most likely an atheist or agnostic. If I'm very lucky, she's a pluralist Christian, where she's like very progressive but still a Christian. Or if I go in the church where everyone is a professing Christian or trying to be as best they can, they have still that their hearts aren't really changed, or they're trying to, but you can still kind of feel this desperation and anger and resentment without them like saying like I hate you, but just that feeling you get where you talked about, where you go into the church and kind of
you know why the Christian message is so powerful. Love is blind, and it overlooks what is dangerous and often incompatible.
Yeah.
And sometimes when people speak about all you need is love and that love is important, they oftentimes mean, without being aware of it, that you don't take an issue with, that you tolerate, that you really don't see a problem with something.
Yeah.
And I think that's also one of the reasons why Christian message, why the Christian message works and is all applicable in a sense.
Well, Aaron, finish what you were saying.
I'm sorry.
No, it's beautiful. I love it.
Land the plane on that. So it sounded like, if you try to, date rando women out there, you'll tend to get atheist or Christian, but not terribly active or committed. You pursue women in the church. Well, I didn't quite understand what the difficulty of the church girls were.
There's one girl that's like very beautiful, and then like all the guys try to like ask her out, and she feels uncomfortable. And then there's a lot of girls who have really great personalities, but also can kind of be kind of mean too, because you can kind of feel like they're getting left behind or something like that. And I think it not only, I mean, this stuff shouldn't matter. We should kind of focus on God, but the landing the plane, it feels like the outworld issues are coming into the church, and we're not really changing or showing that agape love, but we're just kind of wallowing in misery. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, look. I think this goes to your original sort of question, right? Because what you're trying to solve, from what I heard, was you want people to be able to squabble less and cooperate more, right? And I would argue this is the intimacy crisis. Why is it that we're squabbling? Because we don't have intimacy. What's intimacy? It's a quality relationship, the quality of the connection you have with the people around you. And in order to cooperate, to manifest something bigger than yourself, you as an individual and each individual in the group has to say, I care more about this aim, this greater thing, than I care about parts of myself. So I got to be willing to burn off the dead wood. I have to be willing to put up with, Vanderklay just not listening when I speak. It's so frustrating. I just want to.
Comment.
But I keep commenting and keep trying and put all this time in, right? So there's a conflict there, right? But that conflict is not going away because I can't even hit the guy with a paintball. I tried 4 times and the gun jammed all 4 times. I had him.
Protected by God.
Again.
Calvin.
But that conflict has to be accepted. Like, in order for me to cooperate with Vanderklay, or anybody else, I have to accept that conflict and I have to submit to it. I have to say this conflict's going to exist if I want this larger thing to happen. Like, I go on Jacob's stream and, look, every other word Jacob speaks, I think I should just fly to California and strangle him right now because he's so far off base. But I still talk to him, right? And something, look, and probably half the time it's my fault, half the time it's his fault. It doesn't matter. You still have to go through that process and put up with that conflict, right? And accept the conflict that's going to occur, right? And you need a way to do that.
I accept it.
Maybe
it's going to occur. It's going to occur. Aaron, can I talk to you for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, you say when I try to go dating, like when I'm dating, right?
Yeah.
Have you gone to the closet and prayed to God and said, God, I'm really having a lonely heart right now. Could you guide my life into a place where that's eased a little bit? Or are you like going out there hunting women to make children with? Or are you mom shopping? What is dating for you?
I
Please
don't
tell me.
and pray. That's a cute puppy. I don't go and pray about my lifestyle with God as much as I should. That's a real good conviction. Most of the time, it's just seeing a pretty girl and asking her. Like I got at the Target barista, I asked her out. Really cool. She asked for my Instagram, and I asked for her phone number. But then, like, we get to talking. She has a sweet smile, pretty redhead. Like, the first thing we talk about Christianity, and she's like, Jesus is a selfish God. I don't like this. I don't like the Christian God. And she's an ex-Christian, And so if I go to like a honky-tonk bar and go dancing, you think it's like a very conservative place. And, people are wearing icons, which I'm kind of just comfortable with in a bar.
How did she get there?
They go, they...
No. How did she get from I was a Christian to Jesus is a selfish God?
Well, I get that
Does
far.
it matter? Does it matter? I mean, it sounds like you're looking for perfection, Aaron.
Yes, because
no. Wait, let's clear a few things up here. I'm a married guy. Chad's a married guy. David, you're making pizza. Are you a married guy? Yeah. Peter, are you married?
No.
I got something to say about this.
Good.
I did
Let's hear from a married guy, someone who has, managed this. So go ahead, Chad.
Okay, I did a video on my channel, Navigating Patterns. the Friday Morning Nameless, where I talked about things we'll miss about modernity. And what I would say is many men are probably punching above their weight, which is really stupid because it's...
But sometimes it works.
No, it doesn't, actually.
And when it does,
the
rewards are great.
It doesn't work, actually. So what I would say is before the end of modernity, because when modernity ends, we're going to be left with all of our women looking like Napoleon Dynamite in drag. So get used to getting to know the women that are the nice girls, because those are the ones that you can actually sit down and watch Breaking Bad with and make pizza at home with and have a family with, or drive in a car and not even have to say anything and be completely comfortable. But men are unwilling to put up boundaries and adhere to them.
Yeah.
Because they're so used to maybe something that Grimm is getting at. How did she get to this point where Christ is this undesirable thing? Well,
Yeah.
because somebody else set up all her boundaries forever, and they were very undesirable. And we've grown very accustomed to being bullied around by other people's boundaries and not really examining ourselves. And I think that has a lot to do with it. So go after Napoleon Dynamite and drag. You're going to be just fine.
There's the application to Chad's sermon.
Well, I asked her to like one girl asked why, and she really didn't give a really good answer. And so then I just invited her. I told her to come back with me, and she gave like a question mark. And I said, "To Christ Messiah," and then she just texted the emoji, like the laugh emoji, and then and that didn't really go anywhere.
Well, clearly, Aaron, you, I think rightly so, are looking for a woman who has some, is compatible with you in terms of your religion. I mean, religion is a very basic thing. And so it's if you're in a long-term relationship, people's religions may in fact move around a bit. But if you don't start at the same place, if you at least start at the same place, you'll have a degree of understanding of each other and also a degree of directionality in your life that'll at least perhaps help you get a good start. Because a lot of what religion does is give you values, orientation, goals, and having that kind of mutuality early on is going to be really important as you begin setting up at least your initial life commitments. Now, again, people might change along the way, but at least if you start with some goals together, because for example, if you're, as a Christian, if your desire is to glorify God and to live according to the norms of your religious community, and if your partner does not share those same goals, it's really difficult to be on the same page and get on the same page. And part of the truth about hotness is, it's pretty to look at, but it can, I'll tell you, there's a lot of very hot women that are, looking for marriage 2.0 because it's, having a happy, satisfying working relationship goes far more than how she looks. And that's true on many different levels. So, it's at the same time, if you get a community, which as you described, has just a couple of men and a whole lot of women in a singles group, and there's always that tension about people in the group are interested in perhaps finding a mate, and you have a real numerical imbalance, those kind of market dynamics that you just explored. And they're not just between the men and the women, it's between the women, because the women are sizing each other up just as the men, in fact, probably even more than the men are sizing the women up. And that's
without anyone noticing.
So it's one of the themes we haven't talked about it much lately, but one of the conversations on this channel has been sort of the breakdown of the institutions of matchmaking. And could use a little shadow matriarchy in something like this, because in, I think, more functional eras when there was less rapid change in society, older parents, uncles, aunts, matchmakers could look down and help the young say, okay, this woman might not have caught your eye initially, but there are reasons why she might be a very good match for you long term. Now that's really hard. Now if she's displeasing to the eye, it's probably not going to work either. But this is, matchmaking and finding a spouse, it's one of the toughest things you're ever going to do. And then if you in fact succeed in it, maintaining the relationship is going to be one of the toughest things you're ever going to do. So it's amazing we human beings, have any successful marriages at all.
Can I have 2 more minutes and then I'll leave?
Okay.
Okay. In your situation, the Fringe has the following advice as to how to conduct yourself in the singles group. Make it evident that what you find attractive in a mate is like the way she serves the Lord, and let them compete for your attention in that vein. And with regard to your actual mate, like, Lord, let me serve. I will dedicate myself to serving you. Please send me a hottie. And like, dear Lord, I know you are not a transactional God, but I tell you this: I will dedicate myself to you, and I hope you grant me a favor. And
nothing wrong with praying for a hottie. Nothing
So-
wrong with it.
God bless everybody. I'm out of here.
But I really do believe in the idea around men establishing boundaries. I don't think that this is talked about nearly enough. We're always talking about respecting and adhering to women's boundaries, which is true. I mean, obviously, but I don't hear enough, at least in the secular society or that I grew up in. I never heard anything about making a decision to maybe be abstinent or things like this. I didn't even know what dating was. I mean, I thought dating was, you go and you hook up and that was dating.
Yeah.
And this goes to, the intimacy crisis and all this, and I'll keep railing on this. It's like men need to examine what they really are looking for, what they really believe, what are their values, and then create the boundaries and adhere to them no matter what. And then that can help. I think that can help us not only find the mate that we're looking for, but help us grow as well as men.
Well, sometimes.
Go ahead, Pete.
Okay, thanks. Sometimes I would say you just have to experiment. You just have to go in and try, fail again, fail better. And one question is whether the community of a church is the right place to start with your experiments. And I think what Paul said is everything. I think most of it was perfect. Most of it was very correct. But there is another danger, I think, involved in modern times with all the exchange with Tinder and other apps going on. You have this danger of superficial interests. And you say, okay, you are better prepared if you have something that is similar to your own interests and the people you want to date and want not to date. If you structure your habits according to this, you might lose out. You might lose those people who are more interesting in the long run. Maintaining a marriage or partnership might be based on working those things out, which are problematic in the first place, maybe. And I think a working marriage, a long-term partnership, mostly depends on those differences. And you often have a situation that people say, my grandparents, they seem to love each other, but they are so different. I don't understand why they came together in the first place. It's a strange thing. And then you say, it works. It works out because they have learned to work things out. And you are the youngest one out of all of us here, I think. And that might mean you just have to stumble a little bit. And later on, of course, you will know how to deal with those things. And I think what Chet already mentioned, not only men, but also the women, they both have to learn how to deal with those things. Since this is a channel and we are often quoting Peterson, okay, not me, but the other Peterson. Jordan often mentions, I think there was a video in which it was mentioned that they don't know how to differentiate competence and the predators in the male domain. And if they learn it quite early on, that's very good. That's very good for them and in the long run. But most of the women have a situation that they only learn it by 30 or 40, and then the market has changed and the conditions have changed. And what you can get quite early on is the experiences of other people, and try to orientate on your own and learn how to implement that for your own desires and purposes.
Yeah, for sure.
I also think so. When I was, when I was single, I was deeply embedded in a Christian community. The Christian community very much had very specific values and guidelines, as Chad was talking about. The position of the Christian community was against premarital sex. That was an aspirational goal for some. It wasn't for others. I remember comparing notes at my Christian college. Those of us who were virgins, those of us who were not. Premarital sex definitely has had an impact on marriage rates, I think. And I think it has. Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. So I really feel for young Christians today. I think it's much more difficult than when I was young, looking to marry. And I think I know marriage is difficult. And marriage hasn't gotten any easier. So,
but divorce has.
Well, divorce. I've been watching. There's a series on Netflix called Borgen from Denmark about a prime minister, and so the wife, the mother of the family, becomes prime minister rather surprisingly. She's from a minority party, and then the first season spends a fair amount of time on what that does to the marriage, and then there's infidelity, and marriage isn't easy. And in fact, culturally, there's one of the big conversations going on culturally is a question about, does marriage work? Does monogamy remain a viable institution? Scott Adams just had a tweet that basically said, internet cancels marriage. Scott's a two-time loser in this game. And this is one of the big conversations going on in society, and society is all over the map, and partly by virtue of the internet. There are many more voices being heard from. I mean, on one hand, you've got the Bachelor-Bachelorette franchise, which so completely idealizes the romantic partner that no one can possibly bear the weight of that existential load that, this person's going to be my everything. And it's so funny because if you just listen to the words these people are saying, they make no sense, because, well, I believe in unconditional love. And then, they turn around and any tiny misstep by the other person, they're slapped to the curb. It's like, I don't know what you understand by unconditional love, but the smallest misstep or even a major misstep by your partner, you're going to smack them to the curb. No, I want to receive unconditional love, but I am going to mete out very conditional treatment according to whether you give me what I deserve. And marriage is a very intense negotiation about what both partners believe is right, good, and what either will tolerate. So
yeah, and it's the tolerance that we've lost due to individualism, because now more than ever you are more able to appear as though you are an individual in the world, even though that's not a possible configuration for a person, right? And it's one of the weaknesses of talking about the agent-arena relationship, is that you're talking about it in the singular. But there are no arenas where there's only one agent. And there are no, there is no situation where there's only one arena you can operate in. People get confused about that. That's one of the weaknesses, I would say, of Vervaeke's work, is that he talks about it in the singular, and then we get more individualistic. And look, I mean, I don't have to cook. I can call Uber Eats. I live in the woods, but I'm right on the edge. I can call Uber Eats right now and get food, and it'll be here in like 30 minutes. And it, it's relatively expensive, I would say, because I'm cheap and I live in the woods for a reason. But I can do it, right? I can do that. It looks to me like I'm just in my house, and I get a text on my phone, and on my door appears my food, and there were no people involved. I don't have to interact with that person at all, right? So there's no intimacy there. In fact, there's a distinct lack of intimacy. All of my communication with the person or the people providing me my food, and it's a long supply chain, is gone. I don't have any interaction with those people. I don't have to put up with them if they misstep or make a stupid joke, or if they're rude, or if they're ugly, or anything. I can just mediate myself through my cell phone, through the internet, and get really pretty people on my screen, or get just the right video game that I can win, right? So I feel much more powerful in some sense, right? It's like, oh, I know how to win every time. I just play this game that I've already beaten, and then I can win every time. But then when we get out into the real world, because eventually, you have to interact with people, now all of a sudden there's all this conflict, and we don't know how to deal with that conflict. And most conflict is probably not resolvable, but just has to be accepted for the larger thing. And I know Jordan Peterson talks about this in Beyond Order in chapter 10. It's funny because when I read it, I was like, oh, Emmanuel, and I already went through this, right? The relationship is the third thing, and you both have to be submitted to it. And if you're submitted to the third thing, then when you have these conflicts, you're like, oh, it's all worth it because I'm in a marriage, or it's all worth it because this relationship is more than I would have without this other person, right? Because the relationship doesn't exist if you're by yourself, by definition. And that's where we're having the intimacy crisis.
Hey, Paul, I'm wondering if this is could be connected to, this is like this marriage crisis. It's kind of like an intimacy crisis. Is kind of fallout of the kind of the pushing out and almost the elimination of asceticism. Because I recently tripped over this asceticism. I was listening to, I just tripped over this dude, St. John Climacus, I think his name is. And he has like these 30 steps to asceticism, and like to this ladder. And there's like a submission that goes into that. And to me, it seems like the ancient world would have been more in tune with a type of submission through something like a process of submission, something that is painful, that doesn't always seem to bring about positive results, but something that intrinsically is a good thing. And so when that's been swiped off the table and kind of bastardized, I like, this is kind of where we are now. It's like, I don't know, there's not a lot of opportunities to practice submission in the greater culture. I mean, like Mark saying, you can't submit to the video game. Why? I can just press restart. I mean, I've known that since I was like 6 years old, playing, Mario Brothers on Nintendo and NES 1. You know what I mean? So I'm wondering if I was listening. One of the red pill dudes I like to listen to, he has a son with a woman, but he's all about male masculinity and like doing the right thing and all this, but marriage is off the table, and for him and his wife. And I think, and so is the church.
Oh, wait, marriage is off the table for him and his wife?
Yes. Yeah. He's like, no, there's no incentive for the man to get married. And I'm thinking, man.
But he is married.
No, he's not married.
For his woman, not his wife.
That's what I meant.
Oh, his women. Oh, I was going to say marriage is off the table for him and his wife. It's like, isn't that divorce?
No, he's never been married, but he was also raised by a single mother. And, so, and like, we're immersed in a culture that that pushes all these kinds of things down and talks about the church and marriage and stuff, and these things are not good. It's just interesting to me, and I don't know.
Well,
Not making sense coming out of my mouth, but it seems to make sense to me. There's something tied to a lack of asceticism.
Well, I just dropped into the chat an article by Richard Beck that I was reading this morning. Richard Beck is doing, he's one of the best bloggers, in my opinion, one of the best Christian bloggers around. He's doing a review on The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry. And I should have her on my channel sometime. I met her when I was in the UK. And he and Louise Perry connects what's happened in the sexual revolution with disenchantment, and makes the argument that what's happened is the sexual revolution sought to destigmatize sex by disenchanting it, and therefore getting it out of the religious register. What happened as a consequence of that, however, according to Louise Perry, who's writing this from a feminist perspective, from a secular feminist perspective, is that this, in fact, has been a losing proposition for women, because, you know, part of what sets up the dynamic, part of why church singles groups are so hot is, in fact, within the church, you still have an expectation of the enchantment of sexuality. And so particularly the best looking young single woman in a church singles group has a tremendous amount of power, which it sounds like in Aaron's group, she's feeling the downsides of. But all of that power is in some ways set up by the enchantment of sexuality, which comes as a result of its holiness, that it is in fact set apart. And now, obviously, marriage is far more than just sex, but sex and marriage are obviously deeply connected, and we're deeply connected by the Apostle Paul. If you listen to my rough drafts on the channel called Paul Vanderklay, even though Navigating Patterns has, you know, he leaves very meaty comments, but Paul's wooden head, you know, wooden shoes, wooden head, wouldn't listen. But Paul begins to, very much contain sexuality within marriage, and therefore in many ways, giving it enchantment. Whereas in the pre-Christian empire, I mean, sex was simultaneously enchanted, let's say, through Aphrodite, but disenchanted through slavery. So
I do agree with the enchantment point, but I would like to go back to an issue Mark came to. It is regarding the term individualism. I do not agree with the way in which you use that term formally, because let me tell you a little story. I got the story from an economist, and he was speaking about the unintended consequences of economic exchange in a community, of a tribe, for example. You might have a situation that someone says, okay, it might be more profitable for me to take this stuff, those resources, to somewhere else, to a place where I can get more profit, more money from it. And other people will say, why are you taking those things somewhere else? We can very well use those things here. And he's obviously acting against the interest of the community. What you can see here is how someone left a certain tradition, how the individual became free in his manner of speaking by not adhering by the rules or norms of the tribe or the community. And so there was no consent, and consent in a very different sense than consent with marriage or sex or something like that. So we have the situation that men became free. Freedom is an artifact by not a loss of certain traditions, but by not having to adhere to the rules of a group to which you were born. of course, we have the situation that in a Christian community, there is this enchantment. There is a very important aspect of that. I very much agree. I'm fully in that. But I also see that it is scientific progress and error. It was Sigmund Freud and the psychoanalysis which have really disenchanted the sexuality. And this has definitely led down to the path where we are at now. And so we have the situation that this might seem paradoxical, but freedom is an artifact, but we also live in an individualistic society due to the inhibitions to certain desires. By freeing the sexual desires, for example, we became, in a sense, more unfree, I would argue. And the situation seems to be here that the great extended order, for example, of economic exchange, lives very much on this liberal, in the original sense, liberal not in the modern sense, in the American sense, but liberal in classic liberal sense. It very much lives on this ethic. But at the same time, the community is in the situation of restraining and expecting you to behave in a certain manner. And we are living at the same time in that society, in that abstract society, where I think it was you, Mark, maybe it was someone else who left, but where we can encounter other people and transact without exchanging a compliment, without laughing, without joking or something like that. And we just get the pizza in our hands without really engaging with another person as a human being. And I think that's a great difficulty. And this might lead back to a problem which I see here. You, Paul, said and mentioned that we are actually in the situation of discussing how to deal with marriage and romance and so on. I really wonder, and I would like to know what you think about this. Is it really that we can discuss and come to a conclusion, or is it really that we see the results and those groups, those communities, which are able to maintain those values, they will, of course, have their traditions maintained, the marriage, for example, and the romantic partnership. But other people, other traditions, other groups, individuals, will try things out and they will lose this tradition. So later on, we will discuss things and we will retrospectively say, this has happened, this is the problem we're dealing with, and we are not really able to maintain the patterns. I very much doubt whether people are really able by discourse to maintain those patterns or to influence their fellows.
That's interesting.
I mean, outside of their own community, outside of the tradition they are in. And the individual, that's the problem. That's the situation where we're at, I think.
Yeah, I think the problem you outlined with the economist, and I agree with Taleb about economists in general. But the problem you outlined is better solved by original sin, which is to say the traditions are irrelevant to some degree because we're not going to be able to conform to them perfectly because we're not perfect. And that, then it's not individualism. It's just the fact that we are apart, right? When we're not conforming to the whole, but we can't always conform to the whole because that would break evolution anyway, right? And so you don't need some economic sort of way, but I like what you outlined, right? I mean, there's a tension between the horizontal, the realm of quantity where we can measure things, the scientific realm, and science has to stay on the horizontal, right? Science is never, like, unlike Donald Hoffman talks about this to drive me nuts. He starts asking questions. He asks standard stock, well-known philosophical questions. And says, science is going to solve this. It's like, no, definitionally, science is not going to solve philosophical questions. Like, that's never going to happen, right? Because they're fundamentally different types of questions, right? Philosophical questions tend to be those of quality. That's the vertical dimension, right? And this is what you can't measure, or you can't measure the same way. And it's that tension between the quantity and the quality. You're never going to escape quality. Like, you're never going to escape the fact that you're more attracted to some people than others. And it's hard to measure that physically alone, right? Because there's always, like, the most beautiful man, the most beautiful woman sort of thing, right? and everybody doesn't agree, right? But that is it. There's a societal structure that people don't uniformly conform to. And when you make it a non-uniform conformance, now all of a sudden everything makes sense, right? You have to add in that ambiguity, right? Because there's a quality, and quality is ambiguous. That's why it can't be measured the same way that quantity can. And that's what re-enchants the world, the re-enchantment. And you're not re-enchanting the world. The world's already enchanted, right? What you're doing is re-enchanting the person so they can see the enchantment that's already around them, right? Like I don't have this problem. I look out right here. I see, it's fall, so I don't see my roses, but like I see plants everywhere, and there's a bird usually or two. There's, that's already there. Now I have to notice it, because somebody else sitting here would look out and go, oh, it looks all unkempt, which it is, because I haven't been tending my garden, right? And it's kind of ugly, and there's power lines there, and what's going on, right? And they're not seeing the beauty, right? They're not interfacing with the birds and the prettiness and all that. And that's their problem, right? The world isn't like that, but their view of the world is like that, because they've taken the quality out and they're trying to measure things like, well, how symmetrical is that bush? And why isn't it more symmetrical, right? That's the quantity problem.
Paul, would you like to go first? Or
no, you could. Well, okay, I was going to say part of, tradition is one of the real mysteries of tradition is its endurance and its durability.
Yes.
In the Christian Reformed Church right now, we're having a pretty significant conversation about the traditional Christian sexual ethic. And one might, in just looking at the traditional Christian sexual ethic, imagine how would this succeed? How would this last? Each generation sort of comes into consciousness, receives the tradition, and thinks that, especially within our own context, that, well, here's the tradition. We're going to knock the tradition over. And one would imagine that the traditional Christian sexual ethic would be easy to knock over, given the fact that it has been around a long time. And it has, in many cases, aspirational. Back when my church had more people, I had a pretty good understanding of how many of these people had their first child less than 9 months before their marriage date. The Christian sexual ethic has always been demanding, but there is something durable about demanding ethics because they're ideal. And something within us, and there's ideals definitely also have the power of enchantment, because in many ways the best ideals are unattainable. They're always just out of reach, and that just out of reachness draws us. And so it's, what's interesting, T.S. Apostolos in the comments section said the next wave of feminism is conservative and it's already begun. And I think he's right. And part of the amazing thing that I often hear, and to go back, Aaron, to your discussion in your singles group about the traditional and the progressive, part of what progressives really don't, I find, have a appreciation for is just how durable tradition is and the reasons for its durability. And this goes back to the Lindy effect with what's his head? Yeah. Talib, Nassim Talib. And the fact that we always have the anxiety that disruptors in our context are going to wash away the traditions, and traditions do get washed away. The classical world was washed away by Christianity in the West. There's the anxiety that the liberal world will wash away Christianity. It hasn't happened yet, partly because the liberal world, I think, presupposes Christianity and sort of has to always build itself upon this traditional Christian base. And so then you have the anxiety that if liberalism does in fact wash away Christianity, liberalism then collapses in on itself.
Liberalism in the classical sense or in the American sense?
No, in the classical sense.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
a
This is
lot of
walk
the
away without Christianity, you say?
yes, classical liberalism. A lot of the critique of liberalism coming from, let's say, conservative Catholics, basically says that in some ways conservatism is sort of an acid that developed on the top of Christianity. It is eating away at it. But I think their critique that without sort of a lot of Christian assumptions, classical institutions won't function well, because once you set aside a lot of these presuppositions, now suddenly a lot of the chaos of the classical world will be up for grabs, because there won't be as much commonality in terms of basic assumptions about life.
Yes,
and then
that's
you
the
set up.
Böckenförde dictum.
What's that?
That's the Böckenförde dictum. It goes back to Carl Schmitt, a lawyer who is a Catholic, a German Catholic, and that the state is unable to maintain itself, and that it needs those values by other groups, and that those groups have to reproduce themselves for the state to work and function. I think that's the critique that you're getting.
Yeah. So it's, part of the irony, and it shouldn't be so surprising to us that someone like Louise Perry begins to address the sexual revolution not from a position of Christian confessionalism, but from much more of a pragmatic tradition, and says the sexual revolution has been tried and been found wanting, because it doesn't actually give us what we need, which I think then sets up, when I look at what Peterson has brought to the table, his main argument is that it's right away when Peterson came on the scene, the natural law people really got excited, because Peterson has always been making sort of a natural law argument that even in Peterson's perspective of Darwinian evolution, the norms of Christianity can be deduced from those patterns in nature as the best way to live. And I think that's been underneath his argument, underneath his agenda, even as he holds back from confessional Christianity and sort of sits on the sidelines of it as someone who's sort of saying, yeah, this is right. Yeah, I endorse that, but I'm not going to fully participate.
Yes, I agree that this is definitely underlying his argument, but I think it might be fallacious. This goes back to what Mark pointed out. I would go back to his quantity and quality distinction. And please wait a minute, it definitely relates to your point. There is this wonderful story of my favorite theologian, Kierkegaard, of a bird who is in love with a girl, and he comes to the girl and says, I'm here to visit you, my love. And the girl says, who are you? I don't recognize you. And this is quite tragic, because nature in and of itself is not enough. Christianity, in contrast to the Greeks, the Romans, and many ancient cultures, says the individual comes first, because we are made in God's image. This idea is so influential that we have abolished slavery, obviously. But it really relates to Jordan Peterson's point. Is it really intuitively accessible? Can it easily be deduced that the individual is worthwhile? If he is at the same time arguing that slavery and its abolition is really due to the Christian faith and to the values it really worked out, he cannot at the same time consistently argue that it is definitely deduced from natural rights, because both things are in opposition to each other. You cannot assume the anti-factual, and I think you always in your own you were always speaking about the difficulty with the glory of Christ, and I found that wonderful because it is not so obvious that someone like Christ is glorious, and it goes counterintuitive. It's not obvious that someone who is weak is glorious, and I think that's the same thing, the same argument. You have to wait a few centuries for it to be worked out that this is really working, and I think you cannot argue that this comes naturally. I think there's an opposition. Am I wrong here?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds like John Vervaeke's argument. He did this argument best on the Meaning Code when he talked to Wolfgang Smith, right, where science undermines itself, and Peters is making a fundamentally scientific argument, right, into the quality without kind of realizing it, right, and that's why Vervaeke is starting with Neoplatonism and saying no, Neoplatonism as a basis is a cool thing, right, which I've got my doubts about that, right, so. Yeah, I think but that's always gonna undermine. I don't agree with your thesis that Christianity puts the individual at the center. I think it validates the individual as valuable in relation to a higher order, which would be God, right? That's so the thing at the top is
perceivable in the world. God is not perceivable as an object in the world, which is important because this is counter-scientific for the positivists. You cannot measure God.
But my point is, it doesn't make the center of the universe or the most important thing or the most differentiable thing the individual. It does, in fact, say that the individual is but a reflection or a shadow or an image, right, of something else. And it's the something else that is the perfection of that image or of my image or your image or anyone's image. And that's actually an interesting and important. And look, some of that is to some extent baked into what John's calling Neoplatonism, although I might disagree with the existence of Neoplatonism as such, right? There's a point there, which is, there is a perfectibility in the Platonic form, right? And Christianity does a really good job in some sense of codifying that in a way that lots of people can agree with. And, when I asked my buddy Jack about this, Dr. Lantern Jack, that's his channel, he talked to John. They've got another talk coming up too, apparently. I talked to him about Neoplatonism, and he said, who cares? It got wiped out by Christianity. Well, there's a nice pragmatic argument. That's an excellent one, right? Because whatever Neoplatonism is pointing at, if it's pointing at anything at all, it doesn't really matter because Christianity did it better in essence. And, there's an evolutionary argument.
But I think it's true what you're saying, that there's definitely a Platonic argument and idea involved. It's the idea of a participation in the idea in the Platonic sense, which enables for the objects to manifest themselves. Manus in the Latin sense means hand, that you can grasp it, that it becomes reality, and realize it itself is only due to the idea of an abstract thing. And that relates to Christianity in the sense that we have this idea of a love of God, and that might be what you were pointing at, Paul, that I don't know all the reasons, obviously not, for the maintenance of Christianity, but I think one of the reasons is its adaptability and the idea of love. And that might be related to, first, the antefactual, which I was pointing out with regards to Aaron's problems. And the second thing is that, yes, somehow I have to get you in. And somehow it relates to that love relates to the individual, that we are made in the image of God. I think Peugeot is often arguing that. And at the same time, we have this, we are not willing to sacrifice or to resign the particularity. That is something that is inherent in the phenomenology of love. It means, as I was already saying, there's a story of the bird, and it fulfills all the natural conditions, but not the individuality. And if it's not recognizable, you will not perceive it as a loved object. And the more our love relates to the individual, the more intense it becomes. I think that's something that we all can agree, or that we can all perceive by experience, that the more dull the other person is, the less intense really our passion becomes. And that relates obviously in the biological Darwinistic way to the thing that the offspring gains nothing. If you are too similar, if the male and the female have genes which are so similar to each other, the offspring doesn't get anything. And so you need individual particular qualities for which you're willing to even sacrifice something. And I think that's why Christianity was able to maintain itself. It's the idea of not willing to sacrifice. It's the willingness to oversee the obvious, even against something that you have to struggle against. And it's really this maintenance of the individual, even the dignity and the respect for it. Even the idea of Immanuel Kant of the worth of the individual really gets back to the Christian idea and Christian life, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's a good summary. I don't know if we've been any help to you at all, Aaron.
No, it's been fun to dwell and listen to what everyone has to say.
So here's my advice: ask out the most attractive girl in your mind in the group. Get to know her a little bit. Maybe after a date or two, she'll be a lot less attractive, and then move on to the next one.
Well, I don't want to take more time from y'all, but I actually already shot my shot, and I didn't. She said no.
She turned you down?
Yeah.
You're a good-looking guy. I mean,
we had dates, and that's kind of as far as.
Well, I was always, I got to be careful what I say here, because my wife's take on take on my strategy was very different from my own. I was always I had a few attempts of asking girls out that I didn't know, and I always got shot down. So then I adopted a very different strategy of I worked from the friend zone out. So because it's always easier to get into the friend zone, and then you just keep turning up the heat on the friend zone. And then when you're in the friend zone, also you can kind of get a sense of, because sometimes you'd see a girl and be like, wow, really interested in her. And then I'd see something and it'd be like, lose interest, and they kind of wander away to the next one. So I always kind of hung around in the friend zone. And then if there was more interest, I worked up the levels from there instead of just, shooting right for so I had rather an anti-dating strategy. Plus it was also easier, so I did all this in college. So in college, then in a Christian college, you had, 1,000 girls who at least theoretically shared a fair amount of your worldview. And so you could pick from them. And I had I was a security guard, which meant that I had long walks at night through empty parking lots or empty buildings. So I would just say, hey, you want to, what are you doing after 10 o'clock tonight? I've got my rounds. You want to come with me? And, I could always show them interesting things because they have keys to the whole campus. You could, go underneath the swimming pool or, and then it was just a good time to get to know them and make a lot of friends. And then after you get to know them as friends, then see if there's something more. So that was my strategy, and it did eventually pay off in a wife. So
there you go.
But yeah, dating is hard, marriage is hard, and I do think that I do think that there is something of a crisis right now with a lot of young people.
I think the strategy, I guess, most men is just to not worry about it. You talk to people, talk to girls. You put yourself out there, but you can't put that, like I would like a wife thing on a pedestal, or you have to be okay with being alone, and you have to work on yourself to a point where you're not really trying too hard. It just kind of happens. So I think that's kind of, and I guess breaking it back to the Christianity and society too, I think maybe we try too hard for things that aren't working, or we put a lot of energy and frustration But if we just kind of come and just kind of have like a good time and have dialogue like we've been doing, I think that does help a lot with like hardliner soft people or radicals or normies or whatever. I think because I think really what pushed that girl away was was when she kind of pulled away. I was like over texting her, doing all the simpish,
Right.
I'm trying, like, I need you.
Yeah, you don't want to come off as desperate, and you don't want to push it too far too fast, right? There's always a sweet spot. That's why I don't like Paul's false dichotomies, which he does often. Right? There's a third way on almost all of this stuff, and like there's this idea that it's one or the other, but there's always three choices, and that's where people get messed up. There's a way to ease yourself into things. And I think Jordan Peterson does that to people, right? He eases them into the possibility that it's not like either you go out with me now or I'll be alone forever. It's like those aren't your options. Like there's a way in which you can split that baby, because it's not a baby. You can actually find that middle ground, which is a big space actually. And you can find where you are in that middle ground and meet somebody there, right? Even if it's hard for you because like, oh, I want to text them 24/7 and call them, right? Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And there is that middle ground there. And that's what we have to find again. That I would call re-enchantment, is that idea that it's not just two options. It's not just, well, laissez-faire and whatever. I mean, if she comes, if she texts me, she texts me. And it's not, I'm going to text her every 10 minutes. And so, right? There's a lot of middle ground in there.
And I think that relates back to Christianity, because you do not pray 30 or 50, 60 times to God at the very same day because you're desperate to go into heaven. And I would say in that sense, if you have 30 or 40 messages in the mailbox, that's quite desperate. You might want to avoid that.
All right, we have 9 minutes left. CW Week says, I weep for the future. La Familia says, don't take oh shoot, it moved. A number of people have said, don't take dating advice from married guys. So I don't know what that's about.
Well, they're not dating. What do they know about it?
That's true.
This is the guys in the marriage crisis chat on BOM who can't even date, and they're in the marriage crisis chat. It's like, no. You got a few steps before you get to the marriage crisis. Like you've got to get through your dating crisis and at least get to one or close to a marriage before you start complaining about the marriage crisis. Like you're skipping steps.
I came here for the topic of unintended consequences, and now I'm back into the channel for marriage advice.
Yeah, but I think is key too. I think I like that third way. I know that's actually not a good phrase, the third way, but you're being kind of this interest of really understanding where things are coming from is pretty cool.
Well, good. I hope it's helpful. Yeah, it's very hard to know when you're going too far and when you're not going far enough. But there is a way in which you can figure that out.
Well,
Yeah.
And again, part of this is technology. I mean, there wasn't texting when I was in college. There wasn't the internet. There were barely computers. I mean, the world has just changed, and we have a family message group for my family. So it's just a different world.
Yeah. I think that's really a lot of the hardness too. With like woke people or traditional people, it's just we're all dealing with this change.
When you don't have distributed cultural cognition around how to engage with dating sites through texting, we don't. Right. It hasn't been around long enough to have the distributed cognition through time to be part of the culture, and so you're dealing in something that is denying the culture in some sense.
In that sense, we are the guinea pigs, and we have to be sacrificed at the forefront for future generations to profit from our experiences.
But that's where the excitement is, though, too. It's like being a part of something new. There's gonna be a lot of mistakes and stuff. But I mean, I also have to not use dating apps that much either. I was watching a girl talk about how she only meets people in person just because it's when you get to know somebody, it's different than to like have your like specific things that you'd like. It's, I can think a while ago, y'all talking about how you find people who shouldn't really be together, but it works somehow.
Yes.
You know, you meet, and it's hard because you have to approach a woman that doesn't know you. It might be easier if they're like smiling at you, but it's still, I guess I get nervous, and I think asceticism and stuff like that is a good way to practice overcoming those nerves. But
wait for it. I would say sometimes you're surprised. Even those who are engaged with each other are surprised how they ended up here with that partner. And in a sense, sometimes love hits you like an accident, and you will see that everything works out without you intending to.
yeah.
A lot of fun stuff going on in the comments section. Eamon Burke says, married people will tell you to either become a CEO before you ask them out, or to bourbon fart on your first date and make sure she's okay with it. I'm a married man. I didn't hear either of those pieces of advice coming out of my mouth. CW Weeks wants me to talk about biblical critical theory presently being promoted by Tim Keller. I haven't heard any of that. So I don't know what that is, CW. So CW is far better versed on the intricacies and the drama in conservative Reformed communities than I am. I'm paying much more attention to these non-church going people like Jordan Peterson and John Vervaeke than Tim Keller these days. But yeah, there's some then some talk about Third-Way-ism out there. Joey says, Mark spent the last 2 years talking about how relationships are more important than prepositions. Now, when it comes to an actual relationship, he drops that frame and invents third way from scratch.
Troll. Joey's still a troll.
See, this is the beauty to me. Why? So I ask myself some days, why do I do this? Why do I spend time with randos on the internet? And the truth is, it's about the relationships, because it really is. And at Thunder Bay, Mark and I got to sit at that back table when he's hawking Sally Joe's free book, and I'm trying to listen to the what's going on stage, and Mark is giving me the commentary simultaneously. It's like I can't listen to both at the same time.
Both are interesting.
What about when I was trying to listen and you were giving me commentary?
Yeah, that's true too. I did that
too. It
too.
wasn't a one-way operation. You're not pulling that New Jersey trick on me. I still grew up in New England. That went both ways.
So no, and Rick says, I like girl even when they are clothed. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Well, there you go, Rick.
He's definitely doing it wrong. He needs to open up to the potential of Christianity. That's why it survived. Potential.
Okay, Shane Jenkins gives some dating advice here. Free. Patience, faith, and clear intentions. There you go. I don't think that's bad. Eamon Burke says, my point was married people will always lean towards telling you to either become the best version of yourself. That's Joey's advice. He's single. Or make sure you're accepted as you are. The reality is both of these are paralyzing. Well, you're not going to be accepted as you are to some degree. When you start a relationship, there's massive projecting going on. Both sides are projecting their dreams, expectations, and aspirations on the other, and it's happening simultaneously. And that's why after about 7 years, all the projection is gone, and the real marriage begins. Because at that point, all of the baggage, you've seen a lot of the baggage. It's out on the table. Maybe if you might have some children that are along for the ride. And so suddenly the stakes are higher, and you realize that marriage is in some ways two people in a box. And now it's like, okay, you two, now are you really going to learn to love? Which is, are you going to live? Are you going to learn to give to the other? Are you going to learn to compromise? Are you going to learn to sacrifice? Are you going to learn to make the marriage work? And that's the hard work of marriage. And you know, there obviously, and this is why it's actually good to start with someone who at least has shared values, because once all that, you've burned through all that projection, now at least you do have some commonality. Whereas some people find themselves way over here, and you've got to make joint decisions on money, on children, on a whole range of practicalities. There's this show on Netflix with it was about hunting serial killers or something. But one of the guys in the show makes the comment. He says, you know, marriage, part of a marriage is a small business. And he's right. It's the family budget, and it's maintaining the household, and it's, you know, 1 or 2 jobs, and it's raising children. And it's a complex thing.
You need a common aim to submit to, right?
You do.
Then that your partner can submit to. Otherwise, you know, and you have to want that thing that you both can't get by yourselves, right? And you have to want that more than you want part of your egoic version of yourself.
Yep. La Familia says, regarding asceticism, almost as soon as I didn't need to be in a relationship, I found my wife. It's very common.
Yes.
I hear that one all the time. Once I finally gave up on this overwhelming need, bang. But that's not always the case. I've known some people who gave up and they kept giving up. And I know a lot of people in their 50s, especially women, who get to the point of being done with men. I've had that conversation a lot with women in their 50s, especially if they've had 2 or 3 relationships or 2 or 3 marriage or a handful of kids through 2 or 3 husbands. You know, in the Black community, this isn't uncommon. And they get into their 50s and they're like, I am done with men. And then every now and then another man will show up and they're like, you can just turn around and go away because I am done with men, and that includes you. And off they go. So
yes, they die alone, and therefore no stories survive, and that's why we have no successful stories of that way of living.
Closing note from Joey: advice for finding a woman is very different from the advice for finding the woman.
Oh yeah.
Nice one, Joey. Nice one, Joey. Yeah, Joey's good in this conversation. All right, it is 12:02. Thank you all for joining me this morning on this little homeroom experiment and our little conversation. Shane says, my wife said in exasperation, stop doing what I ask and start doing what you know I need. Whoa.
Ouch.
Justice agreed, Paul. I believe part of the purpose of marriage is God's process of chiseling at us. A shared faith is the only way you'll survive that. There's a lot of truth to that. Tim Keller's book on marriage. So anyway, so yes, me and 3 single guys. Well, partly because, I mean, the timing, depending on, I mean, Peter, you're in Germany, so it's late night for you.
20 o'clock, 8 o'clock. Not so bad.
Oh, that's not too bad. Mark, none of us know how Mark lives. Someone said that he thought Mark's garden was well ordered. I would have thought that before I knew Mark, and now that I know Mark, I'm sure it's a shambles.
There's very little pending.
Yeah, and Aaron, yeah, it's fun seeing you around. And are you a student, or I mean, how are you not at work this time of day, or?
I'm on vacation.
Oh, you're on vacation.
Yeah,
oh.
Just gotta take it easy, but
even better. So thank you all for joining, and thank you those of you who have been watching. And I'll probably think of some fun clickbaitable title for this, and
cool.
We'll see how many downvotes I get, because the downside of clickbait is everybody thinks it's going to be about one thing, and when they learn it's just some randos rambling, it's like, screw this. Why does anybody watch this channel? So
a pastor and 3 singers walk into a room.
There you go. All right, everybody. I'm going to end transmission right here and now.
Thanks.